Coming up, South Koreans embrace a new post-pandemic normal as most social distancing rules were scrapped on Monday. Masks are staying on, but they're also likely to be scrapped if cases continue to fall. Seoul and Washington will take strong action at the UN Security Council if Pyongyang carries out further missile or nuclear tests. That's according to the Allies' top envoys on North Korea during US Ambassador Sung Kim's 5-day trip to the south. Russia intensifies attacks across Ukraine in a bid to break down its defences ahead of an expected assault on the east. Washington gets ready to equip and train Kyiv's forces with howitzer cannons.
Hello and welcome to New Day at Arirang. It's Tuesday, April 19th, 8 a.m. here in Seoul, South Korea, and I'm Lee Seung-jae.
And I'm Oh Soo-young. Over the next hour, we'll be covering some of the biggest headlines of the day and get experts' insights on some of the key issues facing Korea and the rest of the world. Welcome changes were implemented from Monday. More social distancing rules in South Korea have finally been lifted.
That's right, and this comes after more than 2 years of trying to stem the spread of COVID-19. Choi Min-jung starts us off.
I'm currently at one of the most crowded streets in Seoul near Gangnam Station, and as you can see behind me, it's fully packed despite it being a Monday evening.
South Korea has lifted most of its social distancing rules, which had first been in place since March 2020. Starting Monday, there are no more size limits on social gatherings, and businesses can open for 24 hours a day. This means people can gather with as many people as they want without curfews. And many seemed excited.
It's great because it feels like we are returning to normal life. It used to be difficult to even have dinner with friends, but now I'm happy because we can stay out until late in this nice weather.
I've waited a long time. Restrictions on business hours were lifted once in November, but I'm extremely glad that they've been lifted once again.
Large events will no longer be limited to under 300 people, meaning rallies and religious services can be held at full capacity. And from April 25th, which is next Monday, people will also be able to have something to eat while enjoying movies and concerts indoors. However, people will still be required to wear masks both indoors and outdoors for at least another 2 weeks. But the mask requirement for outdoors may change after the government assesses the country's virus situation over the next 2 weeks. The public had mixed reactions surrounding the mask mandate.
I think I'll be shy at first, but I want to breathe in fresh air without a mask on.
It's not a concern for young people like us because we recover quickly, but I think it is basic manners to wear a mask to protect the elderly.
The lifting of social distancing measures comes on the back of declining COVID infections. South Korea on Monday reported less than 50,000 new cases for the first time in over 2 months. And the average number of infections per day last week dropped by more than 30% compared to the previous week. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
About 90 countries have been taken off the U.S. health authorities' do not travel list. The U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention on Monday local time lifted its level 4 do not travel recommendations for almost 90 international destinations. These countries, including South Korea, France, Israel, Turkey, Australia, Russia and Japan, have now been moved to level 3, under which the CDC only discourages unvaccinated travellers. The CDC last week also said it's reserving the level 4 travel health notices for regions with special circumstances, like escalating case counts or an emerging new variant.
Now, America's top nuclear envoy is in Seoul to discuss North Korea issues, mainly the regime's latest weapons tests. Now, Sung Kim once again called on the reclusive state to return to dialogue, but also emphasized Washington will deal firmly with provocations. Kim Da-mi shares with us his remarks.
Washington's top nuclear envoy Sung Kim says that the U.S. is ready to talk with North Korea whenever and wherever, urging Pyongyang to come forward onto the path of diplomacy. He said this after meeting with his South Korean counterpart Roh Kyu-duk on Monday, 2 weeks after they last met in Washington.
And I think the fact that I'm back so soon after those consultations is an indication of our determination and commitment to maintain the closest possible coordination with the Republic of Korea on all aspects of DPRK issues and developments.
Kim also made sure to note that the U.S. harbors no hostility toward the regime and reaffirmed the South Korea-U.S. commitment to respond responsibly and decisively to North Korea's provocative behavior in the united context and beyond. Kim further voiced hope of working closely with No and his team during the government transition period. Seoul's top negotiator also stressed that close coordination between the two will be crucial as they navigate this increasingly precarious period, saying the two sides shared concerns that the North's activities raising tensions on the Korean peninsula are likely to continue.
We should still leave the door open for dialogue. We should remain vigilant and guard against every possibility and leave no room for any miscalculation on Pyongyang's part about the enduring strengths of ROK-U.S. alliance.
No then said the two sides have agreed to take strong actions against the North at the UN Security Council if Pyongyang violates any resolutions, such as by carrying out nuclear tests and ICBM launches. Kim's 5-day visit to Seoul will include meetings with South Korean Unification Minister Lee In-young on Tuesday and with officials of the incoming Yoon administration, possibly with the Foreign Minister nominee Park Jin. 김다미, 아리랑 뉴스.
And now it's time for On Point, where we speak to experts to delve deeper into the biggest news stories in the spotlight right now. U.S. Special Representative for North Korea Sung Kim arrived in Seoul on Monday for discussions over a joint response to North Korea's recent missile launches.
Kim reiterated that Washington is still open to dialogue with North Korea, but he and his counterpart Roh Kyu-duk made it clear that there would be firm action against any further provocations. We discussed the significance of this trip, and for this we're joined by Kim Chang-soo, advisor and member of the editorial committee at the Korea Research Institute for National Strategy. Very good morning to you, Dr. Kim. It's lovely to see you. And
good morning.
Well, first off, this trip by Sung Kim, it follows an earlier trip by a South Korean delegation to Washington, led by Park Jin. And, well, I wonder what you make of the significance of Sung Kim's trip to Seoul this week.
I would think Ambassador Sung Kim's visit to Seoul this week as a special mission to foremost and foremost confirm and assure our firm stance to restoring and revitalizing our alliance. Because, you know, many experts, most experts, I would say, in Seoul and Washington have agreed that our alliance has, over the past 5 years, have been drifting and actually gone through many difficulties and differences, particularly with regard to North Korean denuclearization efforts and sanctions on North Korea, and more broadly, what many American experts have understandably termed South Korea's strategic hedging between a hegemonic competition between China and the United States. Washington quite likely wants to see South Korea become much less strategically ambiguous and more reassuring. Secondly, I would say they are talking about the upcoming visit by President Biden to Seoul, in Seoul and Tokyo. And in that place, the new President Yoon will be able to see him personally and talk more deeply and more broadly about our stance toward North Korea's provocations, and also some other regional issues as well. But I think these are the most important points for Mr. Sung Kim's visit to Seoul, to reassure that we are on the same track toward North Korean issues and more some other security issues, pending security issues facing us right now.
But Dr. Kim, I mean, many experts believe that North Korea right now is basically a lost cause. You know, they're not going to strike any kind of dialogue. They're not willing to sit at the table, discuss any kind of negotiation talks. But how do you see Washington dealing with North Korea now, with, of course, Sung Kim visiting Seoul?
I believe the North Korean regime in Pyongyang has shown very poor and really disappointing performances of the last 5 years, or even several decades. I believe North Korea is a failed state, and they have stuck to their own survival strategy of making enemies outside and shielding the leadership and its core supporters from these threats. which is why Pyongyang has never failed to advance its nuclear armament despite the severe economic difficulties due to economic sanctions and what is worse, during the COVID-19 pandemic.
And Dr. Kim, what do you make of Yoon's picks for his top security advisors or ministers, really? He picked Park Jin and Kwon Young-se to lead South Korea's top security issues. What significance do you see there?
I think that the significance with choosing these two gentlemen, because they are the real experts on the United States and Japan for many years, this means that we are going back to the elite professional diplomats rather than just civilian organization experts, because they have so different views about the United States and, for example, about Japan as well. Also, with the same understanding and same views and perspective on these two important allies and friendly countries, we will be in the same boat, and we're going to tackle these issues very effectively, because our relations with Tokyo has been really soured over the past 5 years under this new Moon administration, and we are going to restore it. And I think because these are the most important questions for all of us, and South Korea will want to be a very significant, influential member of the Alliance for Preserving Democracy initiated by U.S. President Joe Biden. Having said that, inter-Korean priority under the Yoon presidency would be to maintain peace and dialogue through power. I would like to emphasize the peace and dialogue through power that will be only plausible by maintaining a robust alliance with the United States. This means the focus of the new administration will continue to be on preserving the alliance over the inter-Korean relations, as has been seemingly the case, particularly with the early years of the Moon Jae-in government.
Dr. Kim, I want to kind of go back to North Korea once again, something that all of us were watching very carefully this past weekend, whether or not North Korea was going to conduct a nuclear test. Now, luckily, that didn't happen over the weekend, but still speculations that North Korea will indeed conduct their 7th nuclear test in the near future. If, let's say, Pyongyang does go through that, how do you see Washington kind of responding to that?
I know this is a very big if and very big if, because North Korea has already shown that they have completely successfully completed its so-called nuclear armaments for themselves, and they don't see to further prove it, because that's what they said. But because they also recently they have a very poor performances with regards to missiles, and that's why they're going to surprise us with another nuclear capability. I thought there is still a long way to go by the American and Korean standard, because we have a strong economic, deterrent vis-a-vis these North Korean nuclear tests. And as Ambassador Sung Kim said, even though we are open to dialogue with North Korea, but we'll be very determined and very strongly deal with if North Korea were to launch another nuclear test. But also, if you look at all these surrounding countries, Japan, the United States, China, and even Russia, North Korea finds it's very difficult to test another nuclear test, because it'll be only in their, that's not because in their interest to target, because if they have already successfully miniaturized, all kinds of nuclear weapons to target military bases in South Korea and Okinawa, for example, and putting multiple nuclear warheads on ICBMs to target the continental United States, that would be, tantamount to a suicide for the Kim regime. So actually, there's a lot of difficulties facing the Kim regime to go further with another nuclear test. But we will be ready for any worst cases. That's what we have been doing for the past 7 decades, and that's what we are going to do in the years to come.
Dr. Kim Chang-soo, thank you very much for your time this morning.
My pleasure.
The United States is set to begin to begin training the Ukrainian military on the use of howitzer cannons included in its latest weapons package for Kyiv. This comes as Russian forces move towards a new offensive targeting the eastern part of Ukraine. Kim Yo-sun has more.
Washington plans to provide training for Ukraine's military on the operation of howitzer artillery systems in the coming days. A senior U.S. defense official who spoke on condition of anonymity explained that the training would take place outside Ukraine. The official highlighted that the move comes as the Biden administration seeks to strengthen Ukraine's military against Russia's aggression in the eastern part of the country. The 155mm howitzer cannons are part of the America's additional weapons package to Ukraine worth $800 million. The package, which President Joe Biden announced last week, includes many of the highly effective weapons systems. The official further explained that there were roughly 76 Russian battalion tactical groups in southern and eastern Ukraine, which is an increase of about 11 in the past days. The official added that fighting still continues in the port city of Mariupol, which Russia is trying to take full control of. Meanwhile, Russian forces stepped up their attacks targeting the eastern Donbas region on Monday. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky stressed that his country will not give away anything that is Ukrainian. Also on Monday, explosions rocked Lviv in a rare and deadly attack on the city located in the east of Ukraine. The city has been serving as a safe hub for refugees, Western officials, and the media. Ukrainian authorities say that at least 7 people were killed in the latest Russian missile strikes. Kim Yo-sun, Arirang News.
The World Bank has lowered its global growth forecast for this year by nearly a full percentage point due to the impacts of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. World Bank President David Malpass said on Monday local time that the bank slashed the world's growth estimate from 4.1% to just 3.2%. He said the biggest reason for this was the projected 4.1% economic contraction in the Europe and Central Asia region, and this is attributed to supply disruptions and sanctions caused by Russia's war. Malpass added that he expects to discuss with the board a new 15-month crisis financing package of $170 billion to cover until June next year. This financing will go towards the world's poorest countries and ones that have accepted refugees from Ukraine. This proposed package is about $10 billion larger than the bank's earlier COVID-19 relief package. Now, corn prices have hit their highest level in almost a decade. On Monday, contracts for July corn futures were trading at a 9-year high, above $8 a bushel on the Chicago Board of Trade. The surge follows concerns over disruptions to grain exports from major producers. Traders fear chilly weather will slow the planting of U.S. crops this spring, potentially reducing yields at harvest time this fall. U.S. grain production is all the more crucial this year as the war in Ukraine has stalled agricultural exports from the Black Sea region, a major global supplier of corn and wheat. Soybean and wheat futures also hit an all-time high amid ongoing Russian aggression in Ukraine.
Now, it's been a month since President-elect Yoon Suk-yeol's transition team started working around the clock on a blueprint for the new administration. Now, some big announcements expected in the coming weeks, but policies on real estate and housing could take some time. Lee Kyung-eun provides a glimpse of what to expect.
Yoon's transition committee will be announcing some of the new government's key policies over the next 2 weeks. A full list will come on May 2nd, 1 week before Yoon takes office. There will mainly be policies that don't require any changes to the current law. That's because the soon-to-be main opposition Liberal Democratic Party holds parliament majority, while Yoon's Conservative People Power Party will hold the government.
The scope of policies could be limited due to the difficulties in passing laws, so we will push for those that won't require legislation so we can get things done in a speedy manner.
But the much anticipated housing policies, the biggest concern among South Koreans, are not likely to be announced yet. The committee is trying to avoid any confusion that may occur due to a sporadic release of information, especially with related discussions expected to take place at the upcoming parliamentary hearing for land and finance minister nominees.
Due to the possibility of an overlap or a change in messages which could cause chaos to the market, we are strongly considering the idea that the new government announces a final comprehensive outline to the real estate policies.
However, the transition team is already fine-tuning the roadmap on COVID-19 for the Yoon administration's first 100 days in line with vision of science-based virus prevention. In addition to the immediate agendas, the transition team said it is setting up long-term goals that may require more than the 5-year presidential term, yet are deemed necessary for national development. While leaving just 3 weeks, the committee's chair vowed to maintain all-out efforts, saying the successful launching of the government largely depends on the success of the transition team. And how the Yoon government kicks things off is especially important with another test at the polls coming up in local elections on June 1st, just weeks after Yoon takes office. 이경은, Arirang News.
Now, speaking at a diplomatic forum, President-elect Yoon emphasized that economy and security are inseparable. Now, he also suggested this will be a key focus of the new government. Yoon Jung-min brings us the highlight from that session.
President-elect Yoon Suk-yeol emphasized the importance of South Korea's economic security for the incoming government, saying economy means security and security means economy. At the Seoul Forum for International Affairs on Monday, he said the vision for economic security discussed at the forum seems to reflect the tasks of the new government.
새 정부가 우리 경제 재도약을 위한 기틀을 갖고 경제 안보의 시대를 철저히 대비해 나가겠습니다.
At the forum, one suggestion was to create a task force on integrated economic security under the presidential office to enable prompt pan-governmental responses to comprehensive risks involving diplomacy, security, economy, environment, and science and technology. Also suggested was that Seoul should host a global forum on democracy and the future. Participants pointed out the increasing global uncertainties affecting South Korea and the international community.
Today, due to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the international community is living through a new nightmare resembling the return of the law of the jungle and the imperialism of the 19th century.
Participants included former Environment Minister Kim Myung-ja, the chairman of the Asan Foundation Chung Mong-jun, and a number of former government officials and university professors. From the business world, participants included the chairman of the Korea International Trade Association Gu Ja-yeol and SK Group chairman Choi Tae-won. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
Now, the People Power Party, whose candidate Yoon Suk-yeol won last month's presidential election, has completed its merger with the minor People's Party, which in the end also backed Yoon's campaign. Now, they've decided to keep the name People Power Party. That was made official on Monday as the chairman of the two parties, Lee Jun-suk and An Chol-soo, signed the agreement in front of the cameras. The merger was widely expected, though, since An merged his own campaign with Yoon just before the election day, and he now serves as chairman of President-elect Yoon's transition committee. Now, in Monday's announcement, the newly merged party will set up a task force soon to work on new policies. As for the immediate concern of the nationwide local elections coming up on June 1st, the statement said the party primaries will give fair representations to members from the former People's Party.
Now it's time for Global Insight, where we speak to experts from around the world on issues making headlines. Russia seems to be intensifying its shelling of Ukraine 7 weeks into its invasion, which began in late February. Under relentless bombardment by Russian forces, the southern port city of Mariupol is refusing to surrender, and a series of attacks in Ukraine's western city and as the second largest city, Kharkiv, has left at least a dozen people dead. A major ground offensive in Ukraine's eastern region is expected, along with continued strikes targeting weapons and logistics centres. While diplomacy is still at a standstill, the cost of war is mounting and the impact of sanctions is leaving all sides reeling. We discussed the latest developments with Raphael Cohen, Director of the Strategy and Doctrine Programme of RAND Project Air Force, and Christopher A. Hartwell, Professor at CHAW School of Management and Law. Thank you both so much for joining us this morning. And, well, first of all, Dr. Cohen, my first question to you. Now, Russia has been scaling up its attacks on Ukrainian cities after issuing a surrender or die ultimatum to forces in Mariupol on Sunday. And now Ukrainian soldiers continue to defy this, and they've been defending their city. But can they really keep it up, though? If it falls, then how would it affect the overall direction of the war?
Well, so first off, thank you so much for having me. I think there are three major consequences if Mariupol falls. First, on a sort of tactical level, it will free up Russian forces that were engaged in the capture of Mariupol for operations further east, or further west, I should say, into the Donbass. So it will tip some of the conventional forces balance. The second, on I think a more strategic level, though, is a lesson that Russia will take away from the fall of Mariupol, which is basically that brutality works. And the way that you take back Ukraine is by leveling it. And that's a very dangerous precedent to set. And then the third, I think, implication for this is more for Ukraine, is that no one, or at least no Western observer that I know of prior to the conflict, would have thought that Mariupol would have held on for as long as it has. And I think this is going to feed into the Ukrainian narrative that defense and the ability of Ukraine to defend its country is far stronger than any outside observer will thought prior to the conflict, will only strengthen the resolve going forward.
And Dr. Cohen, now the US has been preparing an $800 million military package for Ukraine, which includes 500 more Javelin anti-tank missiles, 300 Switchblade drones, and for the first time it's going to provide howitzer cannons and also 40,000 artillery rounds to Ukraine. So what difference will these make?
Sure. So two major implications. So first, on the tactical level, the reason why you want howitzers in particular is the nature of the conflict in the Donbass. The Donbass, unlike the battle for Kyiv, which you saw play out a few weeks ago, this is open terrain. This privileges maneuver, it privileges firepower. That firepower is going to be provided by those howitzers that we're providing among other allies. Then I think on a more strategic level, I think this is actually more of a continuation of the same basic strategy that the United States and its allies are employing vis-a-vis Russia, which is we are going to try to coerce Russia into ending its conflict by two means. One is a sanctions line of effort, and the other one is military aid to Ukraine. The idea is that both of those will inflict enough cost on Russia such that it will stop its offensive and hopefully lead to some sort of settlement.
Professor Hartwell, now, in order to raise the costs for Russia in continuing this war, Western allies are looking into expanding their sanctions options, and the EU earlier this month banned Russian coal for the first time in the fifth package of sanctions imposed in April. Now, oil is set to become a part of a sixth package that's likely to be imposed. What will the sixth package look like, and what impact is it going to have on the Russian economy?
Well, it's sad that it's taken so long to get to this point, that we kind of keep ratcheting up the sanctions while, as Dr. Cohen said, there is just this approach by the Russians to kind of level Ukraine. You know, the reasons have changed back and forth: denazification, demilitarization. Ukraine as the state shouldn't exist. So we've had this very, very slow burn in terms of increasing sanctions. In reality, the only pain that is going to come to Russia is going to come from one of two areas. The first one was already done and was a surprise to me, and I think to a lot of observers, that was freezing the assets of the Russian central bank. Brilliant move, making it so that Russia cannot service its debts, it cannot remain integrated in supply chains, it cannot pay for what it needs in order to feed the war machine. The second bit of sanctions that it needs to be able to inflict real damage is oil and gas. I mean, Europe is still, again, feeding the Russian war machine by purchasing Russian oil and gas. Germany has been very reluctant. Hungary has been outright against this. If we can have some kind of sanctions package that actually includes shutting off from Russian oil and gas, then you will start to see things really start to bite.
But Professor Hartwell, now inflation has been skyrocketing in Europe amid this war and the EU sanctions against Russia, of course. And a recent report by Eurostat in April showed that overall inflation in the Eurozone is up to 7.5%, and that's marking a record high. And well, energy costs alone, they jumped 44% from last year, and food prices around 5%. Now, how is this all affecting daily life in Europe? And do you expect inflation to continue on the up?
Well, we've got two things that are going on here, really three things. The first is that we've been in quantitative easing, unconventional monetary policy for at least 12 years, if not 14 years. And central banks have kept interest rates low. We've had asset buybacks. We've just had tons of liquidity pumped into the system, and it hasn't made kind of Western economies, especially the European Union, it has not made them any more resilient. It's made them much more fragile. Second, we have the self-inflicted economic wound of COVID-19 lockdowns, prohibitions on economic activity. Right now, as we're starting to come out of that, what we see is all of this pent-up demand that is encountering all of this liquidity, and that's encountering supply chain disruptions. So just like in the basic Econ 1 definition, we have too much money chasing too few goods. On top of that, now we have Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which is further disrupting supply chains, creating even more of these kind of disruptions, as well as increasing the costs of energy. It's probably also going to bite when it comes to food, because Russia and Ukraine are such large producers of wheat and corn. I think this is going to create problems going forward. So there really is no end to kind of where we can go with inflation, given this perfect storm of economic conditions. However, the longer the war goes on, the longer we have these kind of disruptions to supply chains, the more we'll see the kind of impact on energy in particular, especially if the EU kind of goes ahead with these sanctions. It's something that we should be willing to bear, but we shouldn't kid ourselves that there is going to be an increase in energy prices.
Well, for now, Russian President Vladimir Putin has been insisting that these sanctions haven't been very effective. But, well, he does seem a bit more concerned about the military aid going towards Ukraine. And Dr. Cohen, now, President Putin has told NATO to stop sending military aid to Ukraine, and he's warned of what he called unpredictable consequences. What might these pertain to?
Sure. So Putin has a variety of escalatory measures at his disposal, some of which he saw play out over the last 24 hours, which is this expansion of strikes in previously safe areas like Lvov out in western Ukraine. You could think of it ratcheting it one step up, trying to interdict weapon shipments as they cross over the border from NATO countries into Ukraine as well, perhaps targeting some of Western individuals inside Ukraine as well. But ultimately, the big card that Putin has is his nuclear weapons card. And he's made a variety of sort of more explicit and less explicit references to using it. And I think that's the one that Western policymakers really need to be concerned about.
And Dr. Cohen, now what's very concerning is that Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky, he warned that the world needs to prepare for the possibility of Russia using nuclear weapons. Now, how should the world then actually prepare for this scenario?
Sure. So, I mean, it's not just President Zelensky who's warned about this. The director of the CIA has warned about it. This is actually, most Russian experts have said that, Putin is ruthless enough that he would use tactical nuclear weapons. And to be clear, a tactical nuclear weapon is still several times the size of the bomb that was dropped on Hiroshima or Nagasaki, for that matter. So these are not small weapons. These are not precise. These would be very brutal. Now, how we prepare for it, I think, is sort of twofold. On a very sort of tactical level, you could talk about surviving in a nuclear environment. That means a variety of protective gear and so forth, treating casualties from radiation, which we know was actually one of the major sources of damage and casualties from a nuclear blast. But I think on a more profound strategic level, though, the United States, NATO, and frankly, the rest of the globe, and particularly global democracies, need to think about how they will respond to the first nuclear use since the end of World War II. And do we really want to live in a world where authoritarian despots can change the map of the globe based on the use of nuclear weapons? I mean, South Korea, of all countries, should realize the concern here. So that's, I think, something that capitals around the world need to begin wrestling with, and need to begin wrestling with sooner rather than later.
And Professor Hartwell, how do you see this? I mean, there's growing nervousness in Europe. How should the continent then really prepare for a possible nuclear scenario?
Well, I agree with everything Dr. Cohen says. It's either you prepare for it now or you prepare for it later. If you let Putin kind of redraw the map of Europe on a whim, that means all he needs to do is threaten. He needs to threaten that there's going to be nuclear war, and then he gets what he wants. He expands to the borders of NATO. And it's salami tactics then. It just keeps slicing a little bit more. At what point do you actually put your foot down and say, no, this is a NATO country. No, this is out of bounds. How can you actually prepare for that? And the problem, again, I'm an economist, I'm not a political scientist. The issue that comes is that this introduces just a huge amount of uncertainty into the markets. It introduces a huge amount of uncertainty into planning going forward, and it depresses economic activity. Not as much as a nuclear warhead would do, though. I would say that would probably depress economic activity the most. But in general, there has to be a line drawn somewhere. And again, looking at this from an economic standpoint, is that you have to increase the costs. You have to make it so that Vladimir Putin knows that there will be massive consequences to any use of a nuke. In fact, even if it is a tactical nuke. Again, Dr. Cohen said kind of the size, the payload that comes with these, we have to ratchet it up so that he cannot even begin to fathom what would happen if he used something like that.
And Professor Hartwell, you mentioned the economic perspective. And well, how should European countries then really diversify their energy sources and safeguard their economies?
Well, the diversification, unfortunately, is long delayed. It's now kind of picking up speed in earnest. We saw Poland, we saw Lithuania doing it after 2014, kind of building the liquefied natural gas terminals to be able to receive shipments from the United States. They have to be looking elsewhere. We have to be looking to the south, to the Gulf countries. We have to be looking back to the United States. The United States needs to be back where it was a few years ago in terms of leading the world in oil and gas production. We need to, domestically, the United States needs to kind of get out of the way when it comes to the regulatory strictures that are on improving the oil and gas industry. And we also have to start being serious about moving away from fossil fuels. The fact that so many authoritarian countries have this ready source of funding, should be troubling as an international relations expert kind of going forward. You can look at the world and say, why do all the despots have all of the money? So we need to think about moving away from that as well. But that's a longer term plan. For the time being, we need to provide competition and we need to turn off the spigot.
Dr. Cohen, finally, with President Putin declaring peace talks pretty much ineffective and diplomatic expulsion taking place on each side, is the diplomatic option effectively dead?
Well, look, I'll say this as an optimist. There will be a diplomatic settlement to this conflict eventually. And the reason for that is Putin has shown he can't take Kyiv, and we're not going to go march to Moscow. So between the two of that means there's going to be some sort of settlement eventually. Now, whether or not that means that the two sides actually sit down and sign a formal peace treaty, or whether there's some sort of tacit ceasefire agreement, I think we don't really know that. But what we can say with Putin's statements and more importantly, Putin's actions, is that diplomatic settlement is not going to be coming in the short run. And I think because of that, we need to frankly focus on the military means and make sure that the Ukrainians have everything they can have to succeed on the battlefield.
Thank you very much, Dr. Cohen at RAND Corporation and Professor Hartwell at the CHAW School of Management and Law.
Thanks so much for having us.
Now, with Russia's invasion nearing the 2-month mark, more than 2.6 million people fled Ukraine. Now, everyone has their own story. Well, our Kim Sang-min met with one of them who've come to Gwangju, South Korea, ethnic Koreans known as Korean, to hear their ordeals and the support they received.
Before dawn on February 24th, the Russian offensive began across Ukraine. That's when 42-year-old Korean-Ukrainian Park Tatiana realized her life was forever changed.
I woke up at 5 a.m. after hearing bombing 3 times. I was terrified, and it's really hard to even recall it.
To find safety, she went first to Moldova and again to Romania before she finally arrived in South Korea.
It's difficult to see a war like this in a generation of peace. I just don't want anyone to go through anything like this.
Also landing on Korean soil a few weeks ago is 28-year-old Kim Olena. She had to leave behind her beloved husband in Mykolaiv when her baby started getting sick. She took a 41-day journey with her 72-year-old grandmother and her 2 kids, one who just turned 1 last week.
My husband is not allowed to leave overseas as he has to protect the city, and it was so scary to see all the ranks of troops with guns. I wouldn't have been able to do it if it weren't for my kids.
After weeks of restless nights, they finally found peace in the South Korean city of Gwangju. Gwangju has become home to thousands of ethnic Koreans, Korean, the descendants of Korean diaspora in Russia, who were forced out to Central Asian countries as well as to Ukraine. Now, it serves as a shelter for Korean-Ukrainians who fled from the war thanks to the Korean Support Center located in a small area of the city called Korean Village.
So far, around 80 Korean, including the ones I've met today, have been coming to the support center since they arrived in South Korea. They usually come to express their gratitude and to get basic necessities like clothing and food.
When Shin Jo-ya, the head of the center, saw that war broke out, she first wanted to save at least one person. But soon, her efforts were echoed by others who gave their help, allowing her to invite many more, including a child who had her first good night's sleep in days.
The mother said her baby slept well for the first time. Hearing that, I cried with all my heart.
And that support continues to arrive, from a truck full of necessities to helping hands from neighbors.
I heard they are having difficulties with clothing because they had to leave in a hurry, so I decided to join the effort.
Here at the center, refugees can take various programs, like this lesson to help them get a foreigner registration. Half of the kids in this class are evacuees from the war in Ukraine. They'll get to learn about Korean culture here and hopefully will feel at home soon. The center hopes to keep supporting Korean refugees, both those taking shelter temporarily and others aiming to start a new life here. Even though most of them say it is unclear what future holds for them, they all wish to deliver the same message.
When I left the country, I felt so lost, not knowing what to do next. Then I arrived here to receive such a welcome from the Korean village. I truly want to thank South Korea and the people here, and I wish them all the best.
Kim Sang-min, Arirang News, Gwangju.
Now, a U.S. senator from Nevada has tweeted a congratulatory message to K-pop boy band BTS on their Las Vegas success. Senator Catherine Cortez Masto, born and raised in Las Vegas, gave a special shout-out to BTS for their recent concerts in the Allegiant Stadium. Now, she congratulated the group for selling out tickets and mentioned how BTS's fan base army had taken over the city during the tour, supporting countless local businesses. Now, BTS wrapped up their final performance last weekend. Their 4 concerts in the city were watched by a total of 620,000 fans.
For a look at news from around the world, we now turn to our Matthew Ashley standing by at the Arirang newsroom. Very good morning to you.
Good morning to you guys.
Good morning to you, Matthew. Now let's begin in South Africa as further updates have come out of the country's flood-stricken eastern coast.
Right, and a week after torrential downpours and massive flooding, 10,000 troops have now been deployed to the KwaZulu-Natal province. According to the South African National Defence Force on Monday, they have been instructed to support cleanup efforts, give medical assistance and provide transport aid. The latest reports put the death toll at 443, with 63 people still unaccounted for. This is while the overall cost of infrastructure damage has reached $684.6 million. Now, this comes as floods left thousands homeless, without power and water services, and disrupted operations at one of Africa's busiest ports located in Durban. Now, Premier of the province, Zikhle Sikalala, said that the floods were among the worst in the region's recorded history. Moving over to India now, as communal clashes in New Delhi have seen 23 people arrested during a festival procession in the Jahangirpuri district. The conflict occurred on Saturday when joint police paramilitary personnel were dispatched to the area following clashes between the majority Hindu and minority Muslim communities. According to authorities, six police officers and several others were injured in the scuffle, which saw 14 initially arrested, with another 9 suspects identified later through CCTV footage. This follows another incident where bricks were thrown at a police team attempting to arrest another suspect. Tensions have risen in India as hardline religious groups have adopted causes they say defend the Hindu faith. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Narendra Modi's Nationalist Hindu Party has denied there has been any rise in communal tensions. Flight tickets are surging in price in light of the ongoing invasion of Ukraine. Ticket prices are being driven up by high oil prices, and airlines are being forced to take longer routes to avoid Russian airspace. According to the Wall Street Journal, the most widely affected route has been the East Asia-Europe passage, with many planes now using the Arctic passage instead. What was once a 9-hour flight from Helsinki to Tokyo now takes about 13 hours. The increase in flight time has also led to fewer flights, and some carriers have removed smaller destinations. Now, if supply remains restricted, ticket prices are likely to soar even higher as demand picks up after the end of pandemic restrictions. Currently, Russian aircraft are banned from entering European airspace, while Russia has also issued a ban on airlines from 36 countries. Hiba Zain, a 24-year-old Syrian woman, has been spending a lot of her time in her car during the holy month of Ramadan. The media student has been busy collecting fast-breaking evening meals from charities and delivering them to those in need. With fuel and transportation costs rising in the country, many families have been unable to travel to charities, prompting Zain to use her own car to deliver meals. Starting with individual food packages, she quickly moved from transporting 3 meals a day to over 30. The number of people in need in Syria is high, with UN figures showing there were 14.6 million people living in poverty in 2021, an increase of 1.2 million from 2020. This means that with Syria's population of around 18 million people, almost 2/3 live in extreme poverty.
Good morning. Weather conditions remain at pleasant levels for most of the country under bright skies today. But morning temperatures are kicking off in the single digits here in the capital, so be sure to dress accordingly. But the concern today, though, dry air that's still in the country. Dry alerts have been expanded to more of the nation. Meanwhile, air quality remains bad all day in the capital region and Chungcheong-namdo province again. Morning temperatures are similar to slightly lower than Monday, Seoul at around 9 degrees Celsius. It's chilly in Chuncheon, below 5 degrees Celsius. But those in Chuncheon, you'll notice a jump of 20 degrees from the chilly morning temperatures, going up to 24 degrees by the afternoon. And elsewhere, we'll also have highs that are similar to a couple degrees higher. Seoul and Busan going up to 22 degrees, Gyeongju, Gwangju topping out at 26 and 25 degrees respectively. Now, the dry and sunny pattern continues across the country, so enjoy the fine spring weather while it's here, but make sure to be cautious and fire aware. With that, here's a look at the weather conditions around the globe.
And that's going to do it for us on this newscast. We'll be back again tomorrow for our Wednesday's edition of New Day at Arirang.
Stick around for more updates throughout the day and, well, thank you for tuning in. Goodbye.
Everyone knows I'm passionate. Know why? Look at how passionate Koreans are. And you know I'm fast. Don't blink. Korean move fast too. I'm creative on the pitch. People say I'm smart. Just look how smart Korea is. I aim to be spectacular for the fans. Why am I so fun? Is it because Korea is so much fun? Visit Korea.